Chapter 5 of The Eye of Osiris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Eye of Osiris by R. Austin Freeman. Chapter 5. The Water-cress Bed. Barnard's practice, like most others, was subject to those fluctuations that fill the struggling practitioner alternately with hope and despair. The work came in paroxysms, with intervals of almost complete stagnation. One of these intermissions occurred on the day after my visit to Neville's Court, with the result that by 11:30 I found myself wondering what I should do with the remainder of the day. The better to consider this weighty problem, I strolled down to the embankment, and leaning on the parapet, contemplated the view across the river, the gray stone bridge with its perspective of arches, the picturesque pile of the shot towers, and beyond, the shadowy shapes of the Abbey and St. Stephen's. It was a pleasant scene, restful and quiet, with a touch of life and a hint of sober romance, when a barge swept down through the middle arch of the bridge with a lug sail hoisted to a jury mast and a white-aproned woman at the tiller. Dreamily I watched the craft creep up upon the moving tide, noted the low freeboard, almost awash, the careful helmswoman, and the dog on the forecastle yapping at the distant shore, and thought of Ruth Bellingham. What was there about this strange girl that had made so deep an impression on me? That was the question that I propounded to myself, and not for the first time. Of the fact itself there was no doubt, but what was the explanation? Was it her unusual surroundings, her occupation and rather recondite learning, her striking personality and exceptional good looks, or her connection with the dramatic mystery of her lost uncle? I concluded that it was all of these. Everything connected with her was unusual and arresting, but over and above these circumstances there was a certain sympathy and personal affinity of which I was strongly conscious, and of which I dimly hoped that she, perhaps, was a little conscious too. At any rate, I was deeply interested in her. Of that there was no doubt whatever. Short as our acquaintance had been, she held a place in my thoughts that had never been held by any other woman. From Ruth Bellingham my reflections passed by a natural transition to the curious story that her father had told me. It was a queer affair, that ill-drawn will, with the baffled lawyer protesting in the background. It almost seemed as if there must be something behind it all, especially when I remembered Mr. Hurst's very singular proposal. But it was out of my depth. It was a case for a lawyer, and to a lawyer it should go. This very night, I resolved, I would go to Thorndyke and give him the whole story as it had been told to me. And then there happened one of those coincidences at which we all wonder when they occur, but which are so frequent as to have become enshrined in a proverb. For even as I formed the resolution, I observed two men approaching from the direction of Blackfriars, and recognized in them my quondam teacher and his junior. "I was just thinking about you," I said as they came up. "Very flattering," replied Jervis, "but I thought you had to talk of the devil." "Perhaps," suggested Thorndyke, "he was talking to himself. But why were you thinking of us, and what was the nature of your thoughts?" "My thoughts had references to the Bellingham case. I spent the whole of last evening at Neville's Court." "Ha! And are there any fresh developments?" "Yes, by Jove, there are. Bellingham gave me a full detailed description of the will, and a pretty document it seems to be." "Did he give you permission to repeat the details to me?" "Yes. I asked specifically if I might, and he had no objection whatever." "Good. We are lunching at Soho to-day, as Polton has his hands full. Come with us, and share our table and tell us your story as we go. Will that suit you?" It suited me admirably in the present state of the practice, and I accepted the invitation with undissembled glee. "Very well," said Thorndyke. "Then let us walk slowly, and finish with matters confidential, before we plunge into the maddening crowd." We set forth at a leisurely pace along the broad pavement, and I commenced my narration. As well as I could remember, I related the circumstances that had led up to the present disposition of the property, and then proceeded to the actual provisions of the will. To all of which my two friends listened with rapt interest, Thorndyke occasionally stopping me to jot down a memorandum in his pocketbook. "Why, the fellow must have been a stark lunatic!" Jervis exclaimed, when I had finished. "He seems to have laid himself out with the most devilish ingenuity to defeat his own ends." "That is not an uncommon peculiarity with testators," Thorndyke remarked. "A direct and perfectly intelligible will is rather the exception. But we can hardly judge until we have seen the actual document. I suppose Bellingham hasn't a copy?" "I don't know," said I, "but I will ask him." "If he has one, I should like to look through it," said Thorndyke. The provisions are very peculiar, and, as Jervis says, admirably calculated to defeat the testator's wishes if they have been correctly reported, and, apart from that, they have a remarkable bearing on the circumstances of the disappearance. I dare say you noticed that." "I noticed that it is very much to Hurst's advantage that the body has not been found." "Yes, of course. But there are some other points that are very significant. However, it would be premature to discuss the terms of the will until we have seen the actual document or a certified copy." "If there is a copy extant," I said, "I will try to get hold of it. But Bellingham is terribly afraid of being suspected of a desire to get professional advice gratis." "That," said Thorndyke, "is natural enough and not discreditable. But you must overcome his scruples somehow. I expect you will be able to. You are a plausible young gentleman, as I remember of old, and you seem to have established yourself as quite the friend of the family." "They are rather interesting people," I explained. "Very cultivated and with a strong leaning toward archaeology. It seems to be in the blood." "Yes," said Thorndyke. "A family tendency, probably due to contact and common surroundings rather than heredity. So you like Godfrey Bellingham?" "Yes. He's a trifle peppery and impulsive, but quite an agreeable, genial old buffer." "And the daughter?" said Jervis. "What is she like?" "Oh, she is a learned lady. Works up bibliographies and references at the museum." "Ah!" Jervis exclaimed with disfavor. "I know the breed. Inky fingers, no chest to speak of, all side and spectacles." I rose artlessly at the gross and palpable bait. "You're quite wrong!" I exclaimed indignantly, contrasting Jervis's hideous presentment with the comely original. "She is an exceedingly good-looking girl, and her manners all that a lady's should be. A little stiff, perhaps, but then I am only an acquaintance, almost a stranger." "But," Jervis persisted, "what is she like? In appearance, I mean. Short, fat, sandy? Give us intelligible details." I made a rapid mental inventory, assisted by my recent cogitations. "She is about 5'7", slim but rather plump, very erect in carriage and graceful in movements, black hair, loosely parted in the middle and falling very prettily away from the forehead, pale, clear complexion, dark gray eyes, straight eyebrows, straight, well-shaped nose, short mouth, rather full, round chin. What the deuce are you grinning at, Jervis?" For my friend had suddenly unmasked his batteries and now threatened, like the Cheshire cat, to dissolve into a mere abstraction of amusement. "If there's a copy of that will, Thorndyke," he said, "we shall get it. I think you agree with me, Reverend Senior?" "I have already said," was the reply, "that I put my trust in Berkeley. And now let us dismiss professional topics. This is our hostelry." He pushed open an unpretentious glazed door, and we followed him into the restaurant, whereof the atmosphere was pervaded by an appetizing meatiness mingled with less agreeable suggestions of the destructive distillation of fat. It was some 2 hours later when I wished my friends adieu under the golden-leaved plane trees of King's Bench Walk. "I won't ask you to come in now," said Thorndyke, "as we have some consultations this afternoon. But come in and see us soon. Don't wait for that copy of the will." "No," said Jervis. "Drop in the evening when your work is done. Unless, of course, there is more attractive society elsewhere. Oh, you needn't turn that color, my dear child. We have all been young once. There is even a tradition that Thorndyke was young some time back in the pre-dynastic period." "Don't take any notice of him, Berkeley," said Thorndyke. "The eggshell is sticking to his head still. He'll know better when he is my age." "Methuselah!" exclaimed Jervis. "I hope I shan't have to wait as long as that." Thorndyke smiled benevolently at his irrepressible junior, and shaking my hand cordially, turned into the entry. From the temple I wandered northward to the adjacent College of Surgeons, where I spent a couple of profitable hours examining the pickles and refreshing my memory on the subjects of pathology and anatomy, marveling afresh, as every practical anatomist must marvel, at the incredibly perfect technique of the dissections, and inwardly paying tribute to the founder of the collection. At length the warning of the clock, combined with an increasing craving for tea, drove me forth and bore me toward the scene of my not very strenuous labors. My mind was still occupied with the contents of the cases and the great glass jars, so that I found myself at the corner of Fetter Lane without a very clear idea of how I had got there. But at that point I was aroused from my reflections rather abruptly by a raucous voice in my ear. "Honorable discovery at Sidcup." I turned wrathfully, for a London street boy's yell, let off at point-blank range, is, in effect, like the smack of an open hand